Los Angeles, America's second most populous city and the center of a sprawling metropolitan area, has long had water demands that far exceed the local supply. And the effort to bring water, sometimes hundreds of miles, to serve the city's population has resulted in some engineering marvels, no small degree of controversy, and one great disaster. The collapse of the St. Francis Dam is the second deadliest disaster in the history of the state of California, behind the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire, yet is substantially less well known, and it deserves to be remembered. This is the city, Los Angeles, California, sometimes called the land of opportunity. Maybe that's why so many people moved out here. During the Depression years, it was said even if you starved in California, you'd enjoy the climate while you were doing it. Since that sentence opened an episode of the television show Dragnet in 1967, the city has added another million residents, and the metropolitan area has grown by 5 million. Those numbers might shock Sergeant Joe Friday, but they offer even more challenges to the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, the largest municipal utility in the United States, which daily provides 435 million gallons of water to the city. Water and Power Associates, a not for profit organization dedicated to informing the public about critical water and energy issues facing Los Angeles and California, explains that water is the lifeblood of every community. At first, that lifeblood came from the Los Angeles River. The city of Los Angeles began European settlement as the Pueblo de Los Angeles, founded by 44 settlers from New Spain in 1781 at the direction of Felipe de Neve, Spanish governor of the Californias. Immediately, water was a concern, and within a month of settlement, the residents had built the Zanja Madre, or the Mother Ditch, an open earthen ditch that carried water from the river to the Pueblo. While it would undergo improvements, the ditch was enough. 60 years after its founding, the Pueblo still only recorded a population of 141. But change was coming. First, with the U.S. victory in the 1846 war with Mexico, in which American forces defeated local Californios and captured the city, which officially became part of the United States as part of the treaty that ended that war. And then a year later, when the discovery of gold in California brought a huge influx of people. Los Angeles became a center of supply for the 49ers who had come to mine gold. In 1850, the Pueblo was incorporated as a city. Smithsonian Magazine notes that when the city of Los Angeles was incorporated as a city in 1850, it had only 1,600 people, most of whom spoke Spanish or were native Paiute or Tongva. The water needs of the growing city became the province of private companies. In 1858, Los Angeles Water Works, owned by Judge William Dryden, built a water wheel to lift the water from the river into the Zanja Madre and built the first of several reservoirs in the center of the town plaza. The system was prone to both drought and flood, even as demands grew. By 1890, the population of the city was 50,000, a number which doubled by 1900. Smithsonian Magazine writes, as people streamed into Los Angeles at the turn of the century, drawn by the consistent warmth, beautiful sun, and arid climate, it was clear the burgeoning metropolitan was in need of many civil services. A reliable water source for a city prone to drought was the most necessary. In 1902, the city of Los Angeles officially formed the Los Angeles Department of Water. It is an enormous task to bring water to a city that was growing exponentially. The population would triple again between 1900 and 1910 and has often been described, although incorrectly, as a desert. While environmental writer Chris Clark protested that LA properly has a Mediterranean climate, the modern definition of a desert is a place that gets less than 10 inches of rain annually, and the 30-year average in LA is just under 12 and a quarter inches, less than a third of what New York City gets. And the man who the city chose for the task was William Mulholland. Water and Power Associates explains that the man who did more than any other to furnish the vital element to Los Angeles is William Mulholland, who for many years was chief engineer and general manager of the city-owned Bureau of Waterworks and Supply. Born in Ireland in 1855, Mulholland immigrated to Los Angeles in 1877, where he was hired as a zenero, one of the men digging the ditches for the city water supply. Smithsonian writes, embodying the American industrious spirit, he used his downtime and meager savings to acquire textbooks on engineering, geology, hydrology, and mathematics. For the next 23 years, Mulholland rose through the ranks of the company, from zenero to foreman to superintendent. When the city founded their water department, they named Mulholland its chief engineer and general manager. As such, he realized something important. Smithsonian writes, Nicknamed the Chief, Mulholland knew that the Los Angeles River was too small to provide water for a city that had grown beyond 100,000 people. Water and Power Associates notes that a volume could be filled with accounts of his engineering and construction achievements. But among the most notable would be the Los Angeles Aqueduct, a 245-mile-long water conveyance system that takes water from the Owens River, fed by the snows of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Smithsonian describes the project as a bold and legacy-defining plan that would lead Los Angeles into the future, while Water and Power Associates describes it as the most difficult engineering project undertaken by any American up to that time. He successfully completed the project within time and cost estimates. In a ceremony in 1913, he said, "Only water was needed to make of this region a tremendously rich and productive empire, and now we have it." Signaling to turn on the spigot as the water began to flow, he said, "There it is. Take it." Thus, Mulholland's vision was central to the city that Joe Friday policed in the 1960s. Water and Power Associates notes, without the additional water supply delivered by the aqueduct, Los Angeles could never have grown beyond 500,000 people. That was the maximum population that the local supply sources could support. Mulholland would be considered an engineering genius for the aqueduct alone, but he understood that even the aqueduct would not be enough, especially in an area that was prone to drought. Smithsonian notes, the next few years, however, would make clear that Mulholland needed a backup plan. The population continued to grow, nearly doubling again between 1910 and 1920. The city faced not just the risk of drought, but also earthquakes. Of course, San Francisco had faced the disaster of the earthquake and fire of 1906, but in 1920, a significant shock hit the city of Inglewood. The aqueduct was largely undamaged, but the earthquake showed that water disruption could come at any time. Moreover, as the aqueduct drained Owens Lake, residents in the valley became hostile as their farms suffered. This agreement became violent, with the people bombing parts of the aqueduct in what was called a water war. To hedge against disruption, Mulholland built 5 reservoirs. 4 were embankment dams made of compacted material, but one, Mulholland Dam in the Hollywood Hills, was of concrete. Constructed between 1923 and 1924, the 200-foot-tall concrete gravity dam held up to 2.5 billion gallons of water from the aqueduct system and groundwater. After his success with those dams, Smithsonian writes, he began construction of his most ambitious project yet, the St. Francis Dam in the San Francisquito Canyon. Completed May 4th, 1926, Smithsonian writes, it was the largest arch-supported dam in the world, with the ability to hold over 12 billion gallons of water, about 2 years' worth of water for the city of Los Angeles. It was another engineering marvel and a career of engineering marvels. It was a testament to the ability of William Mulholland, and the Museum of Ventura County notes, around midnight on March 12, 1928, the dam broke. The disaster came quickly and seemingly without warning. Ace Hopewell, a carpenter at an upstream hydroelectric powerhouse, rode by the dam on his motorcycle 10 minutes before midnight and noticed nothing amiss. Just a few minutes later, the collapse of the dam was sudden and catastrophic. The entire lake, 5 miles long, was drained in less than 70 minutes. The Miles City, Montana Star reported a mass of water, 75 feet high, poured down the canyon from the dam to Carey's Ranch, 5 miles below the dam, literally gouging out everything before it. Within this area lived 100 persons. Sheriff's deputies who first surveyed the scene asserted that not one of these had a chance for his life. Few witnesses survived. One was a man named Ray Rising, who told his story in 1963 and was quoted by Smithsonian. We were all asleep in our wood-framed home in the small canyon just above the powerhouse. I hear a roaring like a cyclone. The water was so high we couldn't get out the front door. The house disintegrated. In the darkness, I became tangled with an oak tree, fought clear and swam to the surface. I was wrapped with electrical wires and held by the only power pole in the canyon. I grabbed the roof of another house, jumping off when it floated to the hillside. I was stripped of clothing, but scrambled up the razorback of a hillside. Rising survived, but his wife and 2 daughters did not. Local historian Charles Outland wrote in a 1963 book on the disaster about the damage in the town of Santa Paula in the Santa Clarita Valley, population around 6,000. It was an unbelievable sight that a stunned Santa Paula citizenry gazed upon in the first fog-filtered rays of dawn. The lower portion of the town was the most appalling, unmitigated mess beyond anyone had ever seen. Foundations or crushed rubble were all that marked where homes had stood the night before. Orchards that had been exactly what orchards should be, trees and cleanly cultivated soil, were now the repositories of broken houses, bridge timbers, and every conceivable kind of flotsam and jetsam. A dead mule lay in the center of Harvard Boulevard, and other carcasses were soon visible in the gathering light of day. Covering everything was a thick carpet of oozy, slimy mud that made walking a hazard on sidewalks and streets. Smithsonian writes, with each stop, the water picked up more debris, more trees, and more casualties. The lucky few that had survived the initial crush grabbed onto anything that would float: mattresses, trees, roofs, and even a water tank, which someone reported to have seen a woman riding in an evening gown. The flood continued 55 miles until it reached the Pacific Ocean, where the Museum of Ventura County reports the dirt and debris could be clearly seen nearly 6 miles out into the ocean. The human toll was large, but still unknown. The museum writes letters arrived from all across the nation. All requested information leading to the whereabouts of missing persons who were believed to have been in the area of the flood. Makeshift morgues were created, although they were quickly overwhelmed. Mulholland rushed to the dam, arriving by 2:30 a.m., and he reported, "We saw at once that the dam was completely out and that the torrential flood of water from the reservoir had left an appalling record of death and destruction in the valley below." A later official record counted 285 deaths, although other estimates go to nearly 600. The disaster did produce its heroes, people who risked their lives to warn people downstream, and an outpouring of aid across the country. But the important question was yet to be answered: what had happened? Initial reports indicate that an earthquake brought the dam down, although quizzically, descriptions of the quake were vague. It was not felt at Newhall, about 20 miles south of the dam, nor at Los Angeles. But there was no earthquake. Those reports apparently were because people upstream felt a rumble as the dam collapsed. Rather, investigations found the failure lay at the feet of William Mulholland. The failures were many. The Association of State Dam Safety Officials writes that Mulholland's experience in concrete dam design was lacking. They note plans for the dam were based upon those previously prepared by Mulholland for the Mulholland Dam, with little regard for site specific investigations. When these plans were finalized and after construction began, the height of the dam was raised by 10 feet on two separate occasions in order to provide additional reservoir storage needed to sustain the growing community surrounding the dam. Although these modifications increased the dam's height by 20 feet, no changes were made to its base width. Perhaps worse, many decisions were simply driven by money. The Association of State Dam Safety Officials writes, the engineering analysis, acquiring of additional materials, and extended construction time to properly mitigate the height increase were considered to be too costly to the project and to those stakeholders who were financially invested in the completion and operation of the dam. Moreover, Mulholland and his team had missed warning signs. Dam keeper Tony Harnischfeger had noticed a leak in the west abutment the morning of March 12th. Mulholland had come out to investigate and determined that the dam was in no danger. Harnischfeger and his family were assumed to be among the first to have perished in the disaster, but at the later inquest, a friend of his testified that Harnischfeger had made some remarks to the unsafeness of the dam and was told by some of the higher ups that if he wished to retain his position, that he better stop talking about the dam as unsafe. It was also discovered that Mulholland had originally wanted to place the dam elsewhere in the San Fernando Valley, but that the landholders asked too much for the land. The site in the San Francisquito Canyon was chosen because it was federal land and much cheaper to acquire, despite the fact that he had previously discovered that the land on the eastern side of the dam was of an unstable nature. Although the inquest eventually exonerated him of any wrongdoing, blaming the collapse on defective foundations, Mulholland did not exonerate himself, saying, "Don't blame anyone else. You just fasten it on me. If there was an error in human judgment, I was the human, and I won't try to fasten it on anyone else. On occasion like this, I envy the dead." Mulholland resigned as chief engineer, although he was retained for a position as chief consulting engineer. And water still remained supreme. California Governor C.C. Young wrote in the investigation report, while fully cognizant of the appalling loss of life and great destruction of property caused by this frightful disaster, it is at the same time self-evident that the full development of this great commonwealth requires that her water resources be fully conserved. This can be done only by containing the constructions of great dams. In 1995, engineer J. David Roberts did a survey and he determined that the dam had collapsed because it had been partially built upon an ancient landslide. He told the LA Times, given the technology available at the time, there was no way that Molland or any of the people working for him could have known about that landslide. Molland passed away in 1935. His obituary in the LA Times didn't even mention the St. Francis Dam disaster, saying merely that after 50 years of service in 1928, he handed in his resignation to the Board of Water and Power Commissioners. The Museum of Ventura County laments that while the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire is well known, the state's second deadliest disaster is an often forgotten event in the state's history. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community and locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.